Let me keep Patrick Brown of Go Vols 24/7 here on campus with our No-Huddle following Tennessee's sixth practice, but the first in full pads, and the energy out of the gates was noteworthy today, especially with the big uglies. They were excited to hit somebody.
And Josh Heupel was excited to tell the referees to treat it like a game day on a Saturday. So that was what we walked into this morning, was him passionately telling them to do their jobs to the best of their abilities.
What, in terms of the couple of open periods that we got, what was your biggest takeaway, your biggest observation there?
Well, we saw some lineup stuff defensively. They rolled through some different groups in the secondary and on the defensive line. I'm not going to go through all those here. It's going to be easier if you just go to Go Vols 24/7 and check out our practice observations. Check those out. But did see some good developments on the injury availability front. Looked like Mike Matthews was involved. First time we've seen him. Dante Thornton was back. Caleb Webb was in a red jersey at receiver. A couple of guys were limited at receiver. Chris Bradley didn't see him do much. Braylon Staley, but Andre Carrick's a little limited right now. He's working on the side, so they're trying to get probably some guys to maybe the scrimmage on Friday and have them ready there, maybe more so than today. But those are some of the main things that saw at practice this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And then afterwards, we got to talk to Rodney Garner, which is always a treat. You never know what Coach G is going to say.
Yeah, you asked him about all the praise the defensive line is getting, and he was like, "Who's praising him? Not me."
Yes, which I should have seen that one coming. But I think you can tell that he's excited about this group. I mean, and when you asked him about, when multiple people asked him about individual players, he said multiple times, like, I'm excited about this guy. He's going to be a good player for us down the road, so on and so forth. So he can put on that tough act, but I think he really likes his room that he's got this year.
He does, and he probably might even be tougher on this group, I would imagine, because he thinks that this group has a lot of potential. You know, he dropped the cliche, to whom much is given, much is required. They've got a lot on this defensive line, and so he's pushing them to play at a championship level every day. That's sort of the big takeaway, and it starts with what he said about James Pierce, where it's like he can be elite, but now we need him to be elite every day.
You need to be a pro every day.
Be a pro every day, and there's obviously some validity to that. And he talked about, you know, the storms of tough games and situations where they've got to push through, and they haven't maybe done that as well in the past when they're playing Alabama and Georgia and in the big games that they've got to win. So that's what he's pushing them to, and that's what these full pad practices in camp are about, because you know, when you have to push through and be mentally and physically tough, you can look back on your training back to days like this.
Yeah, you can. And I think one guy that's flying under the radar is Jackson Moy. And Rodney said that he's diverted him on the plan that he arrived in after transferring from Stanford. I interpreted that as maybe redshirting this year because of how many guys.
I did too.
And now it seems like he's a guy that could absolutely contribute.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to illustrate the strength of this and the depth of this Tennessee defensive line is that guy who was starting at Stanford last season as a sophomore, and David Hobbs, who was a top 50 recruit that Alabama and Georgia wanted. Those are probably your third-team defensive tackles. Yeah. That's how deep they are at that position. So, but Moy, is a guy that has been a hit in the locker room as well. I mean, when Rodney Garner says, like, hey, we were going to do one thing and he made me change my mind, I mean, that says a lot about him as a player. Moy talked about culture being a big part of why he looked at Tennessee coming from California. There's obviously the Polynesian connection. He's connected well with Nico and Keenan Peely and some of those guys as well coming from the West Coast. But another mature guy that can do a lot of different things, and he's going to be a factor on this defensive line.
Yeah, the other three that we got to speak to, Tyree Weathersby, as he works back from his tough hip injury that he suffered last fall camp. He's getting back into the flow of things, seems to be in a good spot coming off of that injury. But the two edge rushers that we got to speak to, Caleb Herring, Joshua Josephs, both spoke about having more confidence, being at the right weight. And I think those two guys, especially Josephs, is going to have a pretty solid year, if not better than a pretty solid year. It's interesting to listen to Josephs talk and admit that, well, first, Rodney Garner said that he's been locked in all off season long, better than he ever has been, focused. And Josephs was asked why, and he said, well, if I'm being completely honest, I got a little jealous of James Pierce Jr. last year because I see this guy, and he said it in a good way and pointed out, like, that's former roommate, my brother, we're thick
they
as
came in
thieves.
together, always kind of be linked. Yeah,
but I mean, and Josephs was just as highly ranked, and it's like, okay, this guy's balling out, I'm not balling out, and that kind of whipped him into shape, and that's why he's had a great offseason. But I think Josephs is going to have a big year, and I think Herring's going to be able to contribute as well.
Yeah, the thing with Josephs that Rodney Garner said, he likes this version of Josephs. He said he's a little bit more closer to what he was his freshman year. Said he kind of took a little bit of a dip, but the tension, the focus has been there like it needs to be. His body's obviously changed, which is something he talked about as well. With Caleb Herring, you want to talk about body changes. He showed up here in January of last year at 205 and was pushing 255 earlier this offseason, to a point where they had to be like, okay, let's maybe take a day and not eat. 6 to 8 shakes is kind of what he was kind of going through the meal plan, and a lot of shakes, a lot of protein shakes, a lot of food. He even said he got tired of eating, but hey, because of that, he got to model the new smoky gray jerseys, which he was excited about. But he talked a little bit too about not playing with his brother Elijah Herring, transferred to Memphis, and how that was tough on him at first, but he is a player that's going to be sort of stepping into a role. There's a few, we talked about all the veterans on this defensive line. You got guys like Herring, David Hobbs, Tyree Weathersby, Jason Jenkins on that other defensive end spot.
Rodney went out of his way to point out that Jason Jenkins is having a really good camp. But I don't know if you heard, because you had to step out for a minute, but Joseph was going down the list of talented players on Tennessee D-line room, and he said, do not sleep on Jason Jenkins.
Yeah, and that's you've got other young guys too that are hungry to say, hey, they're trying to play to the level and get on the level that all these veterans are at, and so it's a really good dynamic in there. And that's something that Rodney talked about too, is just the culture in the room. They're policing each other. Weathersby talked about that, where if you're doing a drill and the technique's not right, you got about 3 or 4 different veterans that are going to say, hey, you need to do it right, and that's Rodney Garner has worked a lot to build that kind of culture over his time here, and he's got it to where he likes it, and I think that's why he likes this room too, talking about that on top of the talent, the depth, the flexibility, all those things.
Yep, plenty of defensive line talk on this day number 6 of Tennessee Fall Camp. We've got plenty of coverage up at GoVols247.com. They'll be back in action tomorrow on Thursday, and then they'll have a scrimmage on Friday night. Josh Heupel scheduled to speak to the media following that scrimmage.
Don't change your plans. It'll be about 9 o'clock.
9 p.m. Eastern. Not 9 a.m., but 9 p.m. Eastern. So plenty of coverage from the second week of camp getting underway, and still plenty more to come this week as they get into full pads, and just 24 days away from kickoff inside of Neyland Stadium against the Mocs. He's Patrick Brown. I'm Ben McKee.